You cannot keep planting compromise and praying for a covenant harvest. One moment of covenant, one moment of compromise. There are moments when you know exactly what you're doing. You know the relationship is wrong. You know the conversation is gossip. You know the opportunity requires dishonesty. You know the message should not be answered. You know the door God closed should remain closed. And yet, we often call it confusion when it really is compromise. We say, I ain't praying about it, but God already told us no. We say, I'm only human. But what we really mean is, I want permission to disobey without feeling convicted. We say, it's only one time, but one moment is enough to surrender something valuable. In Genesis 25, Esau came home hungry and exhausted. Jacob offered him food in exchange for his birthright. Esau said, look, I'm dying of starvation. What good is my birthright to me now? Esau was not actually dying. He was just uncomfortable. And that is where many of us compromise. Not because we're dying, but because we are uncomfortable. We are tired of maybe being lonely, tired of waiting, tired of being disciplined, tired of doing the right thing while other people appear to prosper through disobedience. So we trade what is sacred for what is immediate. We trade peace for attention. We trade purity for temporary affection. We trade integrity for money. We trade discernment for acceptance. We trade our calling for the comfort of fitting in. And then we act surprised when the thing we compromise for begins to control us. Hebrews 12:16 warns us, make sure that no one is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn son for a single meal. A single meal? One moment? One decision made under the pressure of an appetite? And that is the confrontation today. What appetite is stronger than your obedience? Is it the appetite to be loved, to be seen, to prove something? The appetite of money, validation, sex, revenge, or recognition? Because anything you refuse to bring under the authority of God can eventually become the place where you compromise. Compromise rarely begins with rebellion that looks obvious. It begins with small permission. I will only talk to them this once. I will only look this once. I will only hide this part. I will only change the numbers just a little bit. I will only stay for one drink. I will only entertain the thought. But Song of Solomon 2:15 says, catch all the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard. It is those little foxes, the hidden messages, the private conversations, the quiet resentment, the secret habits, the small dishonesty, the boundary you keep moving because you do not want to admit you have already crossed it. Some of us are asking God to protect a covenant we keep exposing through compromise. We ask God to protect our marriage, but we entertain emotional connections outside of it. We ask God to bless our business, but we lie when honesty costs us. We ask God to elevate our ministry, but we refuse correction. We ask God for peace, but we keep returning to the people and places that disturb our spirit. We cannot keep praying for protection while repeatedly opening the door. Daniel understood this. Daniel 1:8 says, but Daniel was determined not to defile himself. Daniel made the decision before the pressure increased. He did not wait until the food was placed in front of him to decide who he was. He settled it in his heart. That is covenant. Covenant does not ask, how close can I get to sin without falling? Covenant asks, how can I honor God with everything He has entrusted me with? Covenant is not based on feelings. Covenant remains when feelings change. Ruth said, wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. That's Ruth 1:16. Ruth chose covenant when there was no visible reward. No Boaz yet, no restored future, no promise that life will become easier. She obeyed without knowing what her obedience will produce. That is where many of us struggle. We want to see the reward before we commit. We want God to show us the whole plan before we say yes. But covenant says, even if I do not understand, I will remain faithful. And let me confront another lie. Saying God knows my heart is not a defense for disobedience. Yes, God does know your heart. He knows when you're genuinely struggling. And He also knows when you are using grace as an excuse to continue doing what He told you to stop. Galatians 6:7 says, don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. You cannot keep planting compromise and praying for a covenant harvest. You cannot plant secrecy and expect trust. You cannot plant lust and expect purity. You cannot plant disobedience and expect spiritual authority. You cannot keep choosing what feels good and then blame God when it produces pain. But hear me clearly. This is not condemnation. Peter compromised. He did. He denied Jesus 3 times. But when Jesus confronted him, Peter did not remain hidden in shame. He allowed himself to be restored. Your worst moment does not have to become your permanent identity. But restoration begins when excuses end. Repentance is not saying I'm sorry I got caught. Repentance says I agree with God about what I did and I'm turning away from it. So today, stop calling compromise a mistake when it has become a pattern. Stop calling it weakness when you keep protecting it. Stop calling it complicated when God has already made the instructions clear. Stop asking God to remove consequences from decisions you are unwilling to change. So ask yourself, what am I protecting that God told me to release? What boundary have I intentionally ignored? What temporary desire am I allowing to threaten something sacred? Why do I keep returning to after God has repeatedly delivered me from? And what covenant is waiting for my obedience? One moment of compromise can cost more than you intended to pay. But one moment of covenant can protect generations you may never live long enough to see. So stop negotiating with what God already told you. Choose covenant. With love, CO.